Hey everybody, this is Natalie Baumgartner, and I'm excited to be sharing with you the summary of our 2022 home garden variety trial. We have been crunching the data this fall. It's taken us a little bit longer than it normally does, but we want to get this information out to you because we know that right now, in this early part of January, you have seed catalogs coming all the time, and we would love for you to have this information to use for your own selections, as well as to help others. And we are currently working certainly on the publication that will come from this trial data, so we'll be able to share that as a regular extension publication. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to recapping this year and highlighting some of the great things coming for you in 2023. All right, so just a little bit about the trial itself in summary to give a little bit of a recap. As typical, we released it in late January. Trials were mailed out through early April, but the bulk of those got shipped in February and March. We had our highest participant number ever. Over 220 people participated, and our highest trial number ever. Nearly 900 trials were sent out. So overall, we had 12 warm season vegetables, 2 cool season vegetables, 2 herbs, 2 flowers, and a youth pollinator trial with our typical limit of 5. Now, the trialers in 2022, this is always really interesting for me to be able to kind of learn a little bit about the people who are participating. You all had an average of 24 years of gardening experience. We had responses, completed trials from 44 Tennessee counties. The average estimated garden production in 2022 was 43 pounds. And I know, we all experienced it. 2022 was a challenging gardening year. Actually, probably the most challenging year in the 8 that I have been in Tennessee. And so, interestingly enough, and we're in some ways glad to see that the data bore it out, we saw the highest number of failure issues in our trialers. So 3 out of 5 people, 61% reported no failure. But then there were close to 40% that had some issue with their trial this year. Not surprisingly, we all struggled. So that ranged from site to germination, insect and disease issues, unknown issues, and wildlife. And another interesting thing is always to find out where our trialers are growing their plants. So 47% were in ground, 40% in soil and raised beds, 2% in soil less media in raised beds, and 11% in containers. So once again, 53%, a majority, were growing in something other than a traditional in-ground bed. And we like to know about people's fertilization techniques. So 14% reported that they actually didn't use fertilizer. 25% were using compost alone. 33% were using compost with some sort of organic fertilizer. And 28% were using conventional fertilizer. So we see our trialers are growing across a range of sites and using a variety of methods. Now, I mentioned this when we kicked off, and that is just that this is a citizen science trial. And so your investment is absolutely what makes this happen. It makes the data the quality that it is, but it also makes this a very enjoyable program, hopefully for you, but certainly for those of us who have the opportunity to facilitate it. So I just wanted to share a little bit from one of our trialers. I get fabulous feedback all throughout the growing season. And so I wish that I could share more. I probably should, but this is just a snapshot that I wanted to share with you from a trialer who used the pollinator youth garden for their grandkids and just reported about the great pollinators that they saw throughout the season, the fact that they're saving seed, and the connection between the pollinators that were coming in from those pollinator plots and how that's very likely supported pollination in some of their other vegetable garden crops. So you all make this trial happen. Now let's get to the data. And so we're just going to run through what is really a trial roundup of the trials that we had. So you get to see the data hot off the presses before anybody else does. So trial number 1 was a bush bean trial. Antigua was a more traditional medium to dark green, slender bean. You can see a picture of it there. And Dulcina was actually a flatter, not as flat as Aroma, but a flatter bean. And we saw statistically there wasn't really any difference, but we see a really high recommendation rate for Antigua and good comments about flavor. So once again, we always try to do a range of bush bean trials, and we always have a pole bean trial as well. So our second trial was the pole bean, and we did see a statistically significant difference here. No surprises. Perennial top performer Kentucky Wonder was higher than flatter, larger bean, actually Northeastern. And so we see a good recommendation rate and good comments for health and flavor in our Kentucky Wonder. There were also some comments about the yield season, and so we can see that Kentucky Wonder was a good performer across the whole season. A new one for us this trial year were cowpeas or black-eyed peas, a southern favorite. And so for some of you, you may have done this trial and said, well, finally, it's about time they grew some cowpeas. And for some of you, this may have been a brand new crop. So this is a warm season legume, and we had two cultivars, pink-eyed purple hull, which is a larger bean or pea, and then we had top pick cream, which is smaller. And we see here that there were trends of preference for pink-eyed purple hull, and so significantly higher ratings for yield, for flavor, for appearance. You can see a picture of a not quite mature, but we get the picture as far as the hull as well as the bean color. So both of these were rated fine, but we start to see some trends as to preferences in our trialers. Okra is once again a southern favorite that we grow every year. And we had two cultivars that really battled to a draw this year. So you see no statistically significant differences in Jade and in Cajun Jewel. Both of them had good comments as far as productivity, taste, holding ability. And so, once again, we had good performance out of two green okra cultivars. Now, in slicer cucumbers, we actually tried some different types of cucumbers this year. We had Bristol, which you see there in the front of the screen, and then we had Southern Delight, which is a longer, slightly different looking type of cucumber, and you can see it there in the back of the screen. Interestingly enough, it was more of a thin-skinned, burpless type of cucumber, and you can see a little bit of cucumber beetle feeding damage there, which actually tended to be a little bit worse on some of those thin-skinned cucumbers. So you can see good ratings, good recommendation percentages. Bristol was a very disease-resistant cultivar, and we see good performance there as well. So two good performers from a disease-resistant, traditional 8-inch slicer like Bristol, as well as a newer option called Southern Delight. Then we had a trial entirely of kind of these long Asian cucumbers. And so we trialed Shintakwa as well as Tasty Green. So Tasty Green was more of a medium green cucumber, Shintakwa more uniformly dark green cucumber. And both of these were well rated by our trialers. You can see up in the mid-8s for Tasty Green, which is a very high rating for a cucumber, and certainly good in the Shintakwa as well. These weren't statistically different. Shintakwa did get good ratings as far as flavor. So in kind of these newer types of cucumbers that we haven't trialed very much before, I think we had really good success, and we'll look forward to continuing some of these options because of their purpless nature, their thinner skin, they can be a little bit more tender. So they're an interesting option to continue to trial in our cucumbers. We have been, over the last few years, having some compact tomatoes, which have really been enjoyed by a lot of our trialers, and we continue that again with Gold Nugget and Red Robin. So as far as physical stature, these are actually very different plants. Gold Nugget was determinate, but a larger plant, and Red Robin, as you can see there, topped out for many people below 10 inches. And so, the ratings were a little bit different depending on people's performance in the pots, but I think both of these cultivars brought something unique and different. As a larger plant, Gold Nugget tended to produce more yield, but we also got a lot of good comments about the taste, about the productivity, about the enjoyability of the very small plant that we see here in Red Robin. So one of the trials that honestly, we just have trouble getting good performance are winter squashes because of their susceptibility to pests and disease when you think about squash bugs and powdery mildew and those types of things, as well as the longer nature of their growing season. And so in the mid 60s is typically what we see for a lot of these winter squash. So this was similar. People did enjoy some of the more compact plants that we saw in some of these delicata squash, but you can see it was a challenging garden season overall, and winter squash are not typically some of our top performers. So it's not terribly surprising that we're seeing some of those lower recommendation rates. Not that these weren't successful for many of our gardeners, but winter squash typically aren't the highest performers in our trials. Options that often are very high performing are green zucchini. And once again, we saw two very solid performers with ratings in the mid to upper sevens. That's high for green zucchini, typically in our trials. And so these were different types of zucchini. Emerald Delight, a standard dark green with cocoselle, as you can see, more of a multicolored fruit. So there were some differences in taste and texture and appearance. But overall, there weren't significant differences in the stats as far as the recommendations or the ratings. But I think both of these performed well enough that certainly they would be options to try in your garden in the future. One of the biggest differences that we actually saw in the trial was in our yellow squash trial. And so as we sometimes do, we have an open pollinated, very familiar standard trialed against a newer hybrid. And so that is what we had. We had the yellow crookneck open pollinated, as well as slick pick, which is a newer hybrid. And this was actually one that we did see some broader differences there. So in yield and in flavor, we saw that hybrid, especially in this challenging growing season that we had in 2022, outperform what would be a very standard kind of old-fashioned type of cultivar. So this was really interesting to see in the ratings and the recommendation rate and in the comments that we saw about yield and flavor. So I don't know if this was true for everybody. Actually, the ratings and the recommendation rate might suggest that it was true for several gardeners. While many crops in the garden were challenged in 2022, muskmelon was actually a very good year for muskmelon in my Knoxville trials. These pictures over here on the left are actually the bottom. The smaller fruit is actually Sugar Cube, which we trialed in previous years, which has done really well for a small size. And I have it in the same picture there as Aphrodite, so that you could see those two fruit together. So the ones that we had in the trial this year were Athena and Aphrodite, which are both kind of standard multi-purpose types of muskmelons. They can be used for gardens, but they can also be used for kind of some elements of shipping. So we'll see them on the small scale commercial end. And we saw almost identical ratings, not statistically significant differences in ratings or whether they would recommend, but really pretty good performance overall. So we see Aphrodite, I could say this, both of these produce very large fruit, especially early on, really big fruit out of Aphrodite. Athena, we see good flavor, earliness of fruiting, and it's kind of a traditional mid-south favorite. So really very good performance out of both of these medium to larger sized muskmelons. And actually, I can also continue that generally positive comments for watermelon as well. We grow seeded watermelon because of the challenges in getting good germination and things like that out of seedless, and the need for pollinizers and that complexity. So these are both seeded watermelons. We saw good ratings out of Sugar Baby, very much an old standard, with really good comments on germination, health, yield, first fruit, and flavor. Now it is a larger bodied plant, right? So Cal Sweetbush got a fine rating, maybe not as high on fruit number due to its smaller size of plant, but if you're growing in a compact area, certainly we had several people who had really good luck with the more compact plant, Cal Sweetbush. Now, when we move into herbs, we actually had two new herbs this year, and some people had really good success with them. Some people had some, I think, germination challenges. And so when I see some of these lower recommendation rates that we're seeing both in the fennel and in the oregano that will follow, I think that that may have been due to getting plants started, germination, seeding types of issues, whether to grow transplants or things like that. We had a lot of people who had very good success with fennel, both in providing a larval host for butterflies, as well as having that edible structure. So pollinator support, lots of good comments. But there were some people that hadn't grown it for the first time or struggled because of the challenging garden season that we had. So you can see really similar ratings from the AAS winning Antares and Dragoon. So there you can kind of see those ratings. And in the oregano, now, for those of you who grew oregano, you knew these were very, very small seeds. And so as a direct seeded crop, that wasn't going to do very well. So we recommended that folks transplant, but some people did run into challenges with getting good stands of transplants due to sometimes the temperature needs. So I think that for people who got good plants up and growing, they had success, but some people did struggle to get good transplants going. So we had kind of a zestier Zatar, actually an AAS winner, and it was actually significantly lower than a more traditional Italian type of oregano. So recommendation rates not great overall, but actually the ratings were pretty good here. And you see good comments for flavor and overall performance out of oregano. In our flower trial, we have grown cosmos before, and we always try to include some of these common favorites. And this year we had Picassie, which you see there as a multicolored purple white, as well as Xanthos. And so statistically speaking, they were similar. I think some people may have, as was a challenge in 2022, had some plant stand difficulties, but in that 6 to 7 range, we saw pretty typical performance out of these flowers. The sunflower trial, actually, I think was one of the best performing flower trials that we've seen in a while. And so this is Autumn Beauty there on the left. It had a range of flower colors from oranges to reds and maroons. But you can see there, once again, battling to a draw, really similar ratings for both of these. Strawberry Lemonade, a newer hybrid, whereas Autumn Beauty is an over-pollinated, but both of these were multi-stemmed. So we got good comments about a range of blooms and a range of color patterns. So overall, it was a successful sunflower year. In our cool season crops, we tried kohlrabi, which for our trial was the first time that we had done kohlrabi. And I think we did have several gardeners that were growing it for the first time. 2 cultivars, 2 green kohlrabi cultivars were grown. Course, which is an AAS winner, as well as Conan. And you can see similar ratings, similar recommendation rates. And I think that, certainly the challenging spring may have lowered some of those recommendation rates a little bit, but we got good comments back as far as taste and texture from many trialers. Kohlrabi is actually, in my experience, kind of a more forgiving cool season crop, because I do not mean in any way to suggest that it's a warm season crop, but it will get you a little bit through, say, warm temperatures in May or something like that, or the early part of June, and still retain good texture. So I think this was a fun, new and different crop to try, and you can see our culinary trialers had lots of fun with that. Now, cool season crops that were challenged, you can see by that recommendation rate, carrots. Carrots actually tripped us up in several years, and I think that it is largely due to the challenging getting good stands. So the spring was hard, and then the fall, sometimes we don't quite have enough time to get a full crop in before we need the trials back. So Caracas was more kind of short, fast carrot, so it was better in heavy soils. Purple Snacks was a multicolored purple and orange, and so we did have some people successfully grow these cultivars, but they were in fact a challenge for some as well. Now, as I close this out, I know this has kind of been a whirlwind tour, but I hope that you enjoyed seeing some of the early snapshot of data. A full report will be coming to give you a lot more detail and more comments and anecdotal remarks about some of those cultivars. But I am always interested in your comments about what you would like to see in 2023. We're thinking maybe some new flowers, calendula, Mexican sunflower. Now, in carrots, some of those cool season crops, we struggled a little bit. We may go back to the basics and stick with some simpler cool season crops like lettuce or radishes. I think we'll try to include some new and different bean crops again, maybe some wax beans, some newer pole beans. So all of those things are on the table, and certainly we're always looking for feedback. Once again, thank you very much for your participation in the past, for your interest in this trial, and we look forward to a great gardening season in 2023.